This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Business expert Jere Glover has the numbers to prove that Democrats are better at running the economy than Republicans. Americans have always been ambivalent about admitting refugees, explains Professor Maria Cristina Garcia. And with the Supreme Court about to take up the president's immigration powers, Bill Press talks with Huffington Post's Elise Foley. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Jere Glover has been collecting data for decades and has the numbers to prove that under Democratic presidents, the economy does much better than under Republicans. And we say hello to Jere Glover, Washington attorney who specializes in the role of government regulation of small businesses. Jere has served as the Small Business Administration's chief counsel for advocacy, and before that was CEO of several successful technology-related businesses. Jere is also a director of 21st Century Democrats. Jere Glover, thank you so much for joining us again today on americasdemocrats.org.
Good to be with you.
And nice to have you back. You've compiled a remarkable set of statistics from official government records about economic growth in the United States since World War II. In brief, what do they show about the two parties?
In brief, they show that under Democratic presidents, the economy does much better than it does under Republican presidents. When you look at virtually any indicator, you find that the economy was better under Democrats than under Republicans.
Now, I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. How can it be that Republicans, allegedly the party of fiscal conservatism, have presided over deficits twice as large as under Democratic administrations?
Well, they talk the rhetoric, but they actually don't do anything about it. When they get in, their deficits are significantly, higher on average than the Democrats' deficits. And I think it's one of those things where they talk about it a lot, but when it comes around to actually doing something, they really aren't that good at it.
Now,
the debt are actually 24% higher because, as you know, the Great Recession, coming out of the Great Recession, actually Obama's numbers did have some early deficits, and those, of course, were carryover from the Great Recession. But when you look at the history, it's 2.3% of GDP under deficits under Democrats versus 3.8 under Republicans, and that pattern stays true pretty much throughout the whole time, regardless of which Republican or which Democrat is in office.
Well, and you mentioned what President Obama kind of took over, if you will, that spilled over in his administration, and look, things are a heck of a lot better now than they were. So that sort of, I guess, supports what the data show. What do the figures show about unemployment and job creation in the past 70 years?
Well, what's interesting is twice as many jobs have been created under Democratic presidents as under Republican presidents, and the average job creation increase per year is 18% higher under Democrats than Republicans. So something about working putting your focus on on individuals and trying to make the create jobs actually turns into real job creation under Democratic presidents, and they do again much better than under Republican administrations.
We're speaking with Jere Glover, Washington attorney specializing in the role of government regulation of small businesses. He, of course, is also a director of 21st Century Democrats. Jere, what about levels and growth of federal spending under each administration? Does one party spend like a miser and one party spend like a drunken sailor? I mean, is that where there's some of these?
Certainly what we see is the federal spending is three times as fast increases as under Democrats. So they certainly do spend significantly more, and it's not just the deficits, but part of the deficits because they spend more money.
The statistics from official, nonpartisan sources show that business investment grows much more under Democratic administrations than under Republicans. So how do you account for that?
Well, I think it turns in the policies that the president's put in place to grow the entire economy and help the individual and create jobs turns out making a better business climate. And so what you see is the businesses turn around and invest significantly more money under Democrats than they do under Republicans. I mean, the numbers are pretty significant. It's 193% higher real business investment, and on the average growth per year, 7.24% versus 2.47% for Republicans. So the business people may think the Republicans are better for them, but when they make their business decisions, they seem to invest more and grow more when you have a Democrat in the White House.
Now, obviously, there are going to be skeptics to some of this. They might think, well, maybe it's just trends that just happen to be coincidentally falling where Democrats and Republicans are over 70-plus years. Are Democrats really that much better with budgets, deficits, job creation than Republicans, or are there unusual historical quirks that come into play?
Well, there certainly are unusual historical quirks that occur, but none of them seem to affect the data over the long period of time. So you might have something that hit 1 year or so, but it certainly doesn't cover the whole period of time. We went back as far as we had good, consistent data. We stopped at World War II. Of course, if you go back further, you pick up President Hoover and the job he did in the Great Depression, and you also pick up the situation where we had Roosevelt bringing us out of the Great Depression, and his numbers and all would have been much better. So I think going back further wouldn't make much difference. We're really talking about since World War II. Basically, the modern age, it looks like very clearly, no matter what indicator you use, and I didn't find any economic indicator in which the Republican did better. We looked at virtually everything you can think of. We looked at job growth, we looked at GDP growth, we looked at business investment, we looked at deficits, unemployment, growth in spending, and we even looked at the stock market, but we didn't use government data for that. There was a study on the stock market that has been done periodically, and it has the same pattern. It shows the economy. We referenced a New York Times article that under Democratic presidents, the stock market has grown 1.92% versus under Republicans 0.6%, or 3 times faster. That does not include President Obama, and under President Obama, the stock market's gone up about 70%. Remember, it was around 10,000 when he came in, and it's now around 1,690 sort of thing. So even looking at that indicator, and that is not a government statistic, but it's one that is interesting. It just shows that this pattern is very consistent over long periods of time.
This is what I don't understand is you have this data, you're talking about a very large sample in terms of time. How is it the Republicans can keep beating this drum that they're the fiscal conservatives and they're the ones that are going to make this country grow?
Well, I think that it's just simply they keep saying it over and over again, and people don't take time to look and see what the facts are. And quite frankly, I have to fault the Democratic Party for not making this very, very clear to people and rebutting it every time it comes up. The Republicans say they're good at this. Somebody should come back in their face and say, no, you're not. That's not the pattern. And, so I know that the Democratic presidents take this very seriously and work very hard, but they worked across the board to make the whole economy work well. Mm-hmm. I know I was involved in the Clinton administration, and there was not one thing the president and his team did to make the economy better. There were literally dozens, and we at the SBA took those things very seriously. We increased the number of loans, we increased the number of business investment, we increased participation and support for small businesses and federal contracting. We did a lot of different things, each of which helped a little bit, as well as the rest of the government also focused on those issues. And it turned out that the economy grew very, very well under President Clinton.
Before we let you go, Jerry, Donald Trump, certainly no progressive, but is there an economic rationale that a working class American might have for voting for him?
Well, let's look at the historical data. We don't know if any one person will be different than the historical pattern. But when we look at recessions, for example, what we find is 9 of the 10 last recessions were under Republican presidents. And when we look to see, how the economy did, the most recent President Bush had 2 recessions in his tenure. Nixon had a couple. Reagan had one. And you go back, Eisenhower had a couple. And quite frankly, Carter is the only president who had a recession. And when you look at the length of time those recessions lasted, Carter's only lasted 6 months. It was one of the shortest of the recessions in modern history. So you have to presume that pattern combined with a Republican president and a Trump presidency and a Congress, a Republican Congress, you will probably end up with the same historical pattern. When you focus on helping a few wealthy people out, it doesn't lift the entire economy. And I think the tax cuts across the board, helping out the average individual, helping out those folks a little less fortunate, get a leg up, and helping things like the Democrats always push for more education and better education for individuals, more opportunities for education. Those things do, over time, create jobs and help the entire economy grow.
It just leaves me thinking, when will we understand, or most folks understand, that trickle-down does not work? Jere Glover, Washington attorney specializing in the role of government regulation for small businesses. He is also a director of 21st Century Democrats, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Jere, thank you so much for your time. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Professor and immigration expert Maria Cristina Garcia tells us that throughout history, Americans have been wary of accepting refugees. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his Common Sense commentary.
Ready or not, it's time to go cruising again. I realize that it can be frightening to travel through the dark, dangerous corridors of Ted Cruz's mind, making stomach-turning hard right turns that suddenly appear without warning. Yet, we must, for this guy intends to be your president. But buckle up, for this trip not only takes us into Ted's mind, but also into the twisting mental curves of his hero, role model, mentor, top advisor, and surrogate campaigner, Rafael Cruz, also known as Daddy. Ted is campaigning as a truth-teller and an honest fighter for freedom, regularly using his father's life story as a guidepost to his own integrity. The candidate tells and retells the story that his father first told him as a boy about how Daddy Cruz had been a courageous rebel leader in Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution in the 1950s. Rafael says he ran guns, threw Molotov cocktails, and even survived arrest and torture in the struggle to bring down the right-wing dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. It's a riveting bit of history that thrills Senator Cruz's audiences and gives emotional power to his political ambition. Indeed, Rafael's Cuban heroics are so inspiring that son Ted features them in his recent campaign book, pointedly titled A Time for Truth. But look out, here's where the high moral road of Rafael's story suddenly washes out, sending his and Ted's integrity spinning off into a deep political ravine. It turns out that practically none of the tales about the father's machismo actions in Cuba actually happened. This is Jim Hightower saying only a handful of real freedom fighters of that time remember Rafael at all, and none of them recall him doing anything more than strutting around and talking big. In fact, he was known as an ojalatero, one who wished the dictator would fall, but was too squeamish to act on it.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Historian Maria Cristina Garcia says Americans have always been ambivalent about refugees, sympathetic but not necessarily accepting.
And we say hello to Maria Cristina Garcia, the Howard Newman Professor of American Studies at Cornell University. Her scholarship is about refugees, immigrants, exiles, and transnationals in the Americas. Professor Garcia, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure having you with us. Although the United States has been a haven for political refugees since the end of World War II, hasn't popular opinion generally been against admitting them?
Yes, the decision to admit refugees has always been contested. Throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, public opinion polls showed that Americans were generally sympathetic to those fleeing communism, for example, but they didn't necessarily want refugees coming here. Some Americans feared that communist spies would infiltrate the U.S. and threaten the U.S. in some way. Others feared that refugees were culturally unassimilable because of their race, their religion, their politics, and yet others objected because it meant accommodating yet one more immigrant population that would compete with citizens for jobs and diminishing resources. But despite this public opposition, the White House has always favored refugee admissions, both for humanitarian reasons and as a Cold War foreign policy, as part of Cold War foreign policy.
Is the right-wing political opposition to admitting Syrian refugees, is that any more strident than opposition to Jews, Hungarians, Cubans, Vietnamese in the past?
Well, the opposition to Syrian refugees does not play out solely along party lines. I have found it just amazing to see how this is an issue. This opposition to Syrian refugees seems to overlap parties. In all the cases that you cited, Americans they always had to be convinced that assisting refugees was a policy that served U.S. interests or that it was simply the right thing to do. And editorials in the press and hearings on Capitol Hill always got heated on issues relating to refugees. But what differentiates the current situation concerning Syrian refugees, it seems to me, is the speed through which information and misinformation travels. You know, the various social media platforms have really changed the speed and the intensity of the conversation. And Americans can express their favor, their support, or their disfavor with particular policies almost instantaneously through a wide range of media. I've learned not to read the comment section of articles because it's easy to despair about the possibility for consensus or even compromise on immigration matters.
Yeah, and you mentioned with technology, and there's also so much misinformation from non-news organizations that people are basing opinion upon.
Absolutely. That's one of the challenges of any professor in a history department or in the humanities and social sciences is teaching our students how to distinguish what is a reliable source from an unreliable source.
Now, what is the difference between the status of someone seeking political asylum and someone seeking refugee status, and what is the vetting process for each category?
Well, refugees cross international borders and they settle in neighboring countries. There they come under the attention of international organizations such as the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, who then might refer them for resettlement in a third country like the United States. The UNHCR tends to resettle only the most vulnerable, or they tend to refer only the most vulnerable for resettlement. People, orphans, victims of torture, women and children at risk of trafficking, or they might refer refugees who already have family in the U.S. Once they are referred to the U.S., the real screening begins, and that takes on average about 24 months. The Departments of State and Homeland Security play a role in the screening process, and they draw on the resources of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Asylum seekers, on the other hand, they're not referred to the U.S. Asylum seekers ask for admission once they are on U.S. soil. They might do so at a port of entry like JFK or LAX airports, or at the U.S.-Canada border or the U.S.-Mexico border, or they might come in as a student or as a tourist and then ask for asylum once they're here on U.S. soil. In response to the terrorism attacks of 1993 and 2001, the refugee and the asylum systems were completely restructured to try to prevent terrorists from using these tracks to enter the U.S. In 1996, for example, 3 years after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Congress passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. Quite a mouthful, I know. And the law contained two provisions that specifically affected asylum seekers, and these were expedited removal and automatic detention. The immigration officer at a port of entry today now has enormous authority to decide on the spot if an asylum seeker has a credible fear of persecution that should be further evaluated by an asylum officer or an immigration judge. And if that officer does not consider the person to have a credible fear, he or she can order the asylum seeker removed from the United States immediately, a process that is known as expedited removal. And another change in the system, in the asylum system, is that now asylum systems are more likely to be held in detention until their asylum hearing. If you have friends or relatives in the U.S., you might be released to them if they are willing to assume responsibility for your care. But it can be a year or more before you are authorized to work in the U.S., and in the meantime, you must rely on these friends or relatives for your livelihood. But more often than not, the asylum bureaucracy prefers to err on the side of caution, and they hold asylum seekers in detention until their hearing. And as you probably know, detention has become increasingly privatized over the past 20 years. It's become a multi-billion-dollar industry in the U.S. So there's a lot of money to be made in detaining immigrants and asylum seekers. And I also, on a final note, I just want to say that the majority of asylum seekers do not receive asylum. They are prevented from making a claim for asylum in the first place, removed from the U.S. through expedited removal, or they are denied an asylum here, or they are denied asylum once they make it to their hearing, because asylum seekers are not granted legal representation. What we understand as due process is largely absent in an immigration court, and without legal representation, your chances of receiving asylum are pretty nil.
We're speaking with Maria Cristina Garcia, the Howard Newman Professor of American Studies at Cornell University. And Professor, Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson has proposed resettling Syrian refugees elsewhere in the Middle East with financial support from the U.S. government and charities. Is that desirable or even workable?
Well, we already do that to a certain extent. The real burden of accommodating refugees is always borne by the countries that border areas of conflict. In the case of the Syrians, it's Lebanon and Jordan that have borne the real burdens of the Syrian refugee crisis. 1/4 of Lebanon's population is refugee. And refugee camps in Jordan, like the Zaatari refugee camp, hold tens of thousands of people. The UNHCR works on the ground in these countries to address humanitarian needs and to try to ease the burden on the host societies like Lebanon and Jordan. And they oversee the distribution of aid in the refugee camps. And they receive 40% of their funding from the United States. A number of other non-governmental organizations, say, for example, Doctors Without Borders, they also work on the ground to provide relief, and they receive much of their funding from private citizens like you and I. So to a certain extent, we're already doing this. Can Americans do more to support these humanitarian agencies? Yeah, absolutely.
Now, those opposed to admitting Syrian refugees, or some anyway, they point to the status of the brothers who committed the Boston Marathon bombing. But they weren't refugees, were they?
No, they weren't. They were the Tsarnaev brothers arrived as children with their parents on tourist visas. And while they were here, staying with relatives, they requested and received asylum. And it was here on U.S. soil that they became radicalized. So they came into the U.S. through very, very different tracks in the immigration bureaucracy.
Now, are there any statistics, anecdotes, other predictors of how refugees can benefit a country?
Well, I'll share with you, some factoids that I like to share in my immigration classes. Historically, the list of refugees who have contributed to the political, economic, and cultural life of our nation is, it's pretty remarkable. When you think about it, it's people like Albert Einstein, Enrico Fermi, Henry Kissinger, Madeleine Albright, Hannah Arendt, Marlene Dietrich, Bela Bartok, Arnold Schoenberg, Marc Chagall. The list goes on and on and on. It's pretty remarkable how many refugees have contributed to the life of the nation. But the majority of refugees are just ordinary individuals like my parents, who came to the U.S. with one suitcase and 2 children in tow. Life as they knew it in Cuba was over, and they struggled to build a new life in a new country and a new language. And they were remarkable people, I think. They resisted the temptation to wallow in despair. They worked hard. They bought a home. They attended PTA meetings. They paid taxes. They voted in local, state, and national elections. They helped their children with their homework. And there's enormous nobility, strength, and courage in those ordinary day-to-day actions. Most refugees are like them, They became citizens not by accident of birth, but because they chose to be. And they are enormously grateful to be part of the privileged few that received refuge in the U.S. But, sadly, ironically, there will be people in this country who will always view them as foreigners. Because of the accent in their, the way they speak English or their surname, but they consider themselves to be thoroughly American.
We certainly have a long way to go in many areas in this country. Before we let you go, your thoughts about how the immigration issue as a whole is going to play out in America as we move forward.
Oh, that's $1 million question.
And that's why we have you here.
I'm trying to be hopeful. I'm old enough to remember the day when people on opposite sides of the political spectrum could find a way to compromise on immigration matters. I'm thinking of people like Ted Kennedy and Alan Simpson, who looked at the world very differently but found a way to work together. And I want to believe that can be possible again. There's so much that we need to tackle in immigration reform. So much of the attention is focused on undocumented immigration, but that's just one piece of the whole, albeit a very important piece. But there are other issues that we need to work out. What is the optimum number of immigrants to bring in each year? Do we continue to privilege family reunification, or should we give greater priority to the skills that are necessary to our economy? Do we do away with diversity visas? These are just three of many issues that we need to tackle in the years to come. So the gridlock doesn't serve us, and hopefully we'll be able to overcome that very soon.
Okay. Professor Maria Cristina Garcia, Professor of American Studies at Cornell University, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Professor, thank you so much for your time. We do look forward to having you back with us again soon.
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Elise Foley about the Supreme Court taking up President Obama's immigration actions.
President Obama, big news this week. He signed those executive orders on guns recently, which followed the signing of executive orders on immigration. And the Supreme Court said this week they are going to take that up, his executive immigration executive orders and make sure or take a look and determine whether they are in fact constitutional. Elise Foley covers these issues, politics and immigration, for the Huffington Post, and she joins us in studio this morning. Hi, Elise. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for coming in. Why did the Supreme Court... This is a case brought by various states challenging the constitutionality of these executive actions. Why would the Supreme Court take it up?
Well, I think it's something that was going to get to them anyway. A judge in Texas ruled in favor of moving the case forward and put an injunction on the programs moving forward. So this is all has all been delayed. It was announced more than a year ago, and no relief has been granted. So
they
far.
haven't kicked in yet.
They have not kicked in, and then a appeals court
there we go.
Upheld that injunction, and so then it went to the Supreme Court. The interesting thing with what the Supreme Court did is that they are not just deciding whether this can move forward, they're deciding whether it's constitutional for the president to do it at all, which is something they'd probably eventually have to determine.
Decide anyhow,
they're going for it now.
So they were given this case, and then they broadened it to look at the whole constitutionality of executive actions in general, or just executive actions when it applies to immigration reform?
Well, they're looking at this specific executive action, but it could still have implications on executive actions in general, because if they say that these types of things are not allowed, obviously Obama says that they both are allowed and they're a good idea. It could mean that in the future presidents would not be able to do certain things on, not just immigration, on other things as well. So all these Republicans who are saying, oh, we want this restricted, are potentially, asking for their power if they become president to be restricted as well.
Has the Supreme Court already shown its hand? Because they did consider challenges to the president's executive authority on health care reform. And ruled in, I mean, that was legislation, right? But they still ruled in his favor. So
yeah, I think potentially. I mean, it's one of those things that depends so much on who you ask. People who support this and think it was the right thing to do and say that it was legal, it was constitutional. People who oppose it, even legal experts say that it wasn't. So I don't know that they did necessarily show their hand entirely. Immigration is sort of a different issue. And like you said, that wasn't done through legislation in any way. It was done simply through the president.
The immigration one.
The immigration one.
Right. But the health care was done through the legislature.
Right.
Yeah, through the Congress. So if they were to say, we're done. The president overreacted, abused his executive authority. If they were to agree with the states, would that be retroactive? For example, how about his executive action on guns? Could they go back and basically say anything President Obama has done by executive action is invalid?
That is a good question. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I think that it would require more lawsuits, right? Other people would have to challenge those executive actions specifically, and then there might be the precedent that looked like those lawsuits would succeed. But I must admit, I am not a legal expert, so I'm not
exactly a lawyer
sure.
either, but I've played one without a license for a long time. So I was curious with the question. But it does seem to me it's interesting in that. The parallel to me that I immediately think of is that the Supreme Court on campaign finance reform, they had this little case years back before Citizens United, and John Roberts says, no, we don't want to just look at that aspect of it. We want to look at the whole enchilada about campaigns finance, and that ended up in Citizens United. So here the court is saying, well, we have this challenge to this one executive action, but let's look at the constitutionality, the basic principles. So, is there an agenda on the part of the court? Again, who knows? Maybe, and then is the agenda to say we want to really put down the use of executive authority, or that we want to establish once and for all that all presidents have done similar things, and that's what the executive can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question, and we'll see, because it either puts this to rest or it affirms all these people who say that Obama is overstepping not just on immigration, but on all sorts of things.
Right. I mean, it's interesting to me that this is fundamentally a question about the power of the presidency versus the power of the Congress, and the power of the court. I mean, it's the balance of power thing. And how far each one can go, right, before they overstep their bounds or step into the authority of another branch of government. And we've been dealing with that since this country was founded. I mean, it's one of the basic questions that this country has always faced since the adoption of the Constitution. So here we go again.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's happened on these types of things have happened on immigration before in terms of making sort of executive decisions that have implications sort of like this, but maybe on a smaller scale. All
right. So on immigration, as you point out, when was it the president signed these? Over a year ago, right?
It was in November of 2014.
Okay. So we've been waiting since then for the courts to decide whether or not these things can go forward. Will the Supreme Court now? So President Obama's out, right? January 2017. Will the Supreme Court decide this issue, and will there be enough time for the people that the president wants to help to get the relief that they need before President Obama's out of the White House?
Well, I think so. I mean, they are supposed to decide, I believe, hear it in around April, make an announcement on their ruling around June. So that does leave a decent bit of time. Since this wasn't entirely blocked from moving forward until a little while after it was announced, a lot of people were already starting to put their paperwork in order. There's a lot of things that you have to prove, such as how long you've been in the country, when you entered, staying, your children being born here, stuff like that. So a lot of people already started putting those documents in order. Mm-hmm. If they did that, and perhaps there will be another effort now that the Supreme Court is going to rule on it to get them to do that, I think that they could apply pretty quickly. The administration had actually already started part of it, had been planning to start the larger part with parents fairly soon when it was blocked. So I think that they are pretty much ready to go and would certainly have the incentive to put as many people through it as possible, because the more people have it, the harder it is for another president to take it away.
Yeah. This question came up at our briefing on today's Tuesday, and a little bit on Monday as well. And Josh Earnest said, well, we feel good about this because we're confident that the law is on our side, the Constitution's on our side. We're confident the Supreme Court will see that. They'll see it quickly, and that will give us time to provide these families that have been waiting for relief. So the White House is optimistic about it, and let's hope it goes in that direction.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Jere Glover, Maria Cristina Garcia, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.